My name is Keegan McIntosh. I'm the Executive Director of Lifespan Society of British Columbia. We are a community nonprofit in the field of life extension. We engage in educational activities, community building activities, and advocacy work in the field of life extension, which defined very broadly is any way for people to live healthier, longer lives. So without going too much further, I just want to make sure if people can mute their cell phones or turn them off, and if possible, refrain from using the restrooms during presentations, but obviously if you need, you need. I think we pointed everybody to refreshments in the back, but if you'd like a glass of water or coffee, that's back there, and some tea. And the topic today is life extension in your brain. It was a pretty easy topic for us to pick because it ties together a lot of the different fields within the broader field of life extension. Partly because I think there's a growing recognition that so much of our bodies is or is going to someday become replaceable. But at this point, from what we can tell, that isn't as true for the brain. And so no matter what we're doing with our bodies, it should be with a view towards supporting the health and longevity of our brains. So the first speaker we have today is Hans Wu. He's an upper year medical student at the University of British Columbia who has been involved with online life extension forums for over a decade, if I'm correct. So it's longer than me, that's for sure, longer than a lot of people that are so young. And he has what I would call a near encyclopedic knowledge of evidence-based nutrition. And he spoke at our mini conference last year, and there was just so much information. So this year we were like, okay, just the brain. And even then, he's probably got more material that he can share today. So we're really looking forward to hearing more, and I'll give it away to Hans.
Thanks, Keegan. Press the key.
Oh yes, just press one.
Yeah, so this is a much more narrow topic than I did last year. I told Keegan last year I had a 15-minute presentation, and it was being 45 minutes or something. So this is nutrition in the brain, and I'm including a lot of other stuff, but my main focus is on nutrition. So as Keegan said, what we want to do is to be able to preserve our brain into old age, right? And so a way to explain what dementia is like to people can be found in this great article by a law professor, and describes it as, I now find myself conscious that I'm translating English into itself before I understand. So this is how he is experiencing dementia. He has to receive the English and then translate it to himself before he can understand, right? And then someone else who's suffering from early onset dementia is Sir Terry Pratchett, who writes the series Discworld. He calls it embuggeration. Any obstacle, natural or artificial, that gets in the way of progress. So Alzheimer's. Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of my favorite authors, American authors, is nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. So what is Alzheimer's disease? It's a fatal and progressive and degenerative disease that destroys the brain cells. Currently there's no cure. We kind of have an understanding of what causes it, and we kind of have an understanding of what prevents it. So what I'm here to talk about today is how we can prevent it. Alzheimer's, you have a constellation of symptoms, the most common one being memory loss and forgetfulness. If any of you had parents or grandparents, you know that your short-term memory is non-existent, or it's disappearing. Right? They forget your names, they forget what they ate at breakfast, they forgot what they did yesterday. And you have a bunch of other things: confusion, difficulty concentration, disorientation. If we get all these symptoms, we basically lose who we are. So what are the contributors to things like dementia and Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia? So based on studies, approximately 50% is non-modifiable. Basically it means your genetics contribute to 50%. That you can't change for now. So there are genes like ApoE, COMT, BDNF that predict your risk of Alzheimer's, and something you can't change. The other thing is your age. As you get older, you get more dementia. But the positive side of that is 50% of it is modifiable. So the diet, supplements, exercise, preventing traumatic brain injury, avoiding things like smoking, alcohol, and living a healthy life with a social life with less stress. So I'm here to talk about the 50%. It's just the same thing. So one thing that's being in the literature nowadays for dementia and Alzheimer's is the Mediterranean diet. And it's mainly due to this amazing randomized trial based on nutrition. Now, if any of you have read nutrition literature, a lot of it is epidemiological, right? There's a lot of association that you can't prove anything. And what people want is a randomized controlled trial telling a large group of people to eat one thing and a large group of people not to eat that one thing, and then see what happens down the road. So in this study, they put a group of people on the Mediterranean diet with extra virgin olive oil. And the extra virgin olive oil is 1 liter for a family of 4 per week. And that comes down to about 2 tablespoons a day. Now the other group is a Mediterranean diet plus nuts. And then that's provide 30 grams of lipids for each person. And then you have a low-fat controlled diet. And the N is 285, which is pretty sizable for a nutrition study. And this is the result. So on the left here, you have the Mediterranean diet plus the olive oil. And the odds ratio compared to the control group, which is a low-fat diet, is 0.341. And then with the nuts, it's 0.563. So from this, we can see that the Mediterranean diet offers protection from dementia, but olive oil adds another layer. It adds 0.1 something protection from dementia. So what is the Mediterranean diet? This is taken from the Old Ways food guide. I think it's from Spain. So at the base you have a lot of whole grains. Then you have fruits and vegetables. Then you have a special place just for olive oil. And then you have all the rest. So meat, sweets, eggs, they're taken a few times per week. They're not taken every day. And regular physical activity and wine in moderation. And I would like to talk about vegetables. So when a lot of people talk about fruits and vegetables, they group them together. Like they're kind of the same thing. But in reality, studies show that they are not. So what they did was they systematically reviewed a bunch of cohort studies. And so there's 9 studies in total that they looked at, 44,000 participants. And what they concluded was that in terms of dementia risk, vegetables offered protection, but fruits did not. So, and you can see this in a bunch of other studies that I'm not going to mention, but vegetables offer protection, but fruits don't. And in the studies where they find associations between fruits and vegetables offering protection, it's mainly the vegetables that I think offer protection, not the fruits. So eat your vegetables. The other thing that is being bouncing around is the idea that low cholesterol causes Alzheimer's, or low cholesterol causes dementia. And I'm going to put aside the whole statin causing a dementia thing because we're here to prevent ourselves from using statins, right? So I'm not going to touch that topic. Statins have other effects other than lowering cholesterol. So what I want to talk about is how you can use nutrition and healthy exercise to lower your cholesterol. And if you do that, does that put you at risk for dementia? So I looked at the studies. It was really hard to determine because most studies used was epidemiological in nature. It was just associations, no causation. But I found these 2 papers. So what they did was they, in seniors' home, when they died, they did autopsies on their brains. So they performed autopsies. They looked at the neuropathology, looking at neuritic plaques, neurofibrillary tangles, looking at the structure of the brain. And then they compared that to lipids 10 years ago. And what they found was that higher cholesterol equals higher neuropathology. It wasn't that they found all this neuropathology and they had low cholesterol. They had high cholesterol 10 years ago. So how could that be? It's a function of reverse causation. It's not that low cholesterol causes dementia. It's that dementia causes low cholesterol. So when they examined it over 10 years, what they found was that people that developed dementia later had lower cholesterol 10 years earlier. So the process of dementia, like the damage that happens to your brain, is starting 10 years earlier. And that's what causes low cholesterol. It's not the other way around. So this is an example of why association isn't the end all be all, because you don't know which causes which. And I think this is a good example that you have to really look at the studies. You really have to do a randomized controlled trial, or think of some other way to figure out which way causation points. And then this is an example of if you do develop clinically significant dementia, 5 to 10 years before that, they can find changes in your cerebral spinal fluid. So the damage that caused your parents to start losing their memory started 10 years before. But on the other hand, they did population studies on people 90 plus, biopsied all their brains, and they tried to determine which pathology in the brain was associated with dementia. In reality, most people over 90 plus have all these amyloid plaques. They have neurofibrillary triangles. They have neuritic plaques. So what does it say about all these neuropathologies causing dementia? Because normal people without dementia also have these plaques. Yes. But I think the question to take away from that is that even though you do have some people that are clinically normal, that don't have any signs of dementia, but if you biopsy their brain, they do have plaques, where it shows that there's some protective features in them that cause them to function despite having all these plaques in their brains. And in terms of what that is, we don't know yet. But what we do know is that the damage that's caused in the brain does lead to dementia, but some people are just protected from it. And so other contributors to this is diabetes, heart disease, overweight, blood pressure, and these all have their modifiable and non-modifiable factors too. And it's approximately 40 to 50% non-modifiable. Your genetics contribute to it. The other 50% again is modifiable. And the biggest contributor, the biggest thing that's modifiable is also your diet. If you search up, just do a simple Google scholar search about the Mediterranean diet and these diseases, and you'll find that the Mediterranean diet does have an effect on all these contributors. The Mediterranean diet lowers your risk of heart disease, lowers your blood pressure, lowers your risk of cancer. And then we come to supplements. Now, in the supplement industry, there's a lot of claims about what is neuroprotective. But I've only found 2, creatine and lithium, that actually have solid evidence for its ability to protect the brain from damage. So the first one is creatine. This study has been bouncing around for a while, and there was a previous one, I think in 2001, that studied the same thing. They looked at vegetarians versus omnivores. They supplemented both with creatine. The vegetarians supplemented with creatine, which is only found in meat products, by the way, had better brain function. Right? And then there's a lot of research now in the military and in sports that creatine prevents against traumatic brain injury. So how does it do that? So there are several in vitro studies that found that when you expose brain, like neurons, to beta amyloid or glutamate, which is toxic to them, if they had creatine present, they would be protected from this type of damage. And the authors hypothesized that it provides greater energy reserves. We don't know if that's true, but it does offer neuroprotection against stressors. And the next one is lithium. This is a supplement that many people associate with mental disorders, bipolar, and things like that. But people who are bipolar take around 300 milligrams, which is super high dose. So there's this study done in Japan and one done in Texas. So lithium, our intake is usually due to the water source in the natural environment. And so different water sources have different concentrations of lithium. And so if you plot the amount of lithium in the water on the x-axis and their suicide risk on the y-axis, you can see this correlation. So the more lithium there is, the less suicide risk there is in that prefecture or state. And this has been reproduced in Texas too, where they have different varying amounts of lithium in their water sources. And there is an association between depression and dementia. And people who are depressed have higher suicide risk. And this is one paper, if you're interested in lithium, that looks at the essentiality of lithium. There's a lot of research actually in adults about lithium and neuroprotection in your mental health. And what he concludes is that there's enough evidence to say that the RDA is probably around 1 milligram per day for an adult. I don't think this will ever gain as much momentum as the whole vitamin D movement that's been going on with their research, because vitamin D is already prevalent in the supplement industry, so it's very easy for the general population to obtain it. Lithium, on the other hand, is something that has a negative connotation for many people and isn't that easy to find, especially in the doses of 1 milligram. But it does, in lots of studies in rats and stuff, it offers incredible neuroprotection for the brain. And the other things to avoid is lead and mercury. These are toxins that we don't want to consume. Lead is not something I think we have to be worried about. It's not found in paint or wine vats anymore. The thing we have to be worried about probably is mercury. And so what we have to, in terms of mercury, what we have to be careful is types of fish and seafood we consume. This is just a list I use to determine what seafood is lowest mercury. So things like tuna, very high mercury. They say it's safe for people to eat it a couple times a week. They say it's safe for pregnant women to eat it once or twice a week. I personally try to avoid all tuna. The best thing to eat would be scallops, salmon, things like that. Fish that don't eat other fish and that don't survive that long in the water. The other thing to avoid toxins is probably to get a water filter in your home. I prefer a reverse osmosis filter if you guys are interested in getting a filter. The other thing you have to be worried about is because of the nuclear power plant leak in Japan. There's a lot of, looking at the tidal systems, the ocean currents, a lot of that radiation will wash up to the west coast. And I've been debating whether to stop consumption of seafood altogether because of that, because we live at the west coast. A lot of our seafood does come from here, and a lot of the radiation does end up in the west coast. But maybe we'll hear about it 2 or 3 years later. But no one's going to take care of that now. But if you get a water filter, it should help you remove many of the toxins and even some of the radiation that's present in your water. And the other thing is physical exercise and brain exercise. Strength of the mind is exercise, not rest. It's exercise alone that supports the spirits and keeps the mind in vigor. So how does exercise help the brain? I found this on Google Images. I don't know where it's from. But brisk walking increases the production of neurons in these regions of the brain, the frontal lobe and the corpus callosum. In terms of your evidence for a meta-analysis on prospective studies, the more physical activity you did, the more protected you were from cognitive decline. So there are many mechanisms for this. And this isn't an extensive list, it's just what I found was prudent. So if you exercise, you increase blood flow, not only to your muscles, to your brain. You have decreased oxidation and inflammation. You have a reduction in misfolded of proteins. And the likely mechanism of this is exercise induces autophagy. It tries to make your body more efficient, so it gets rid of the garbage in a way. Autophagy is consuming, literal translation, autophagy is consuming the self, but autophagy for life extension, you're consuming things that are broken down, that you don't need, the toxins. And then probably the most significant contributors is neurogenesis and synaptogenesis. It was originally thought that as adults, our brain cells, our neurons couldn't grow anymore, couldn't connect anymore, but that's found to be false. If you push yourself to learn, you can grow more neurons. You can grow more synapses. And if you push yourself to exercise, you can also grow more neurons and synapses. And then the topic of brain exercise. So a lot of people say to prevent dementia, lead a social life, do crossword puzzles, do Sudoku, play games, play bridge, whatever. But this study is a 3-month study. It shows something different. It's 3 months, 221 people, ages 60 to 90. In one group, they had a group of people learn photography or quilting. This is something they've never done before. And they did this for 15 hours a week for over 3 months. And they had a control group where they did their usual things, social activities, games, movies, but they learned no new skills for 3 months. And another control group where they were told to work on word puzzles or listen to classical music. And what they found over the course of 3 months is that those who learned a new skill had improved memory function, while those who didn't learn new skills, just continue to socialize, listen to music, do crossword puzzles, Sudoku, or whatever, had no increase in their memory function. So what it really shows that if you want to exercise your brain, you really have to push yourself. You have to do something challenging. Push yourself to learn so that you can create these new pathways and new synapses that your brains can use. And I suspect that in the very old, even though their brains are full of amyloid plaques, full of neuritic plaques, that people who are motivated to push themselves to learn new things are able to circumvent the interference in their pathways from this damage. Right? So push yourself to learn new things. And just a short thing on sleep. In terms of how sleep can prevent dementia, sleep lowers stress levels. It's just good for your health. And the other thing for your brain is it can improve the clearance of beta amyloid. So this isn't done in humans, this is done in rats. But for some reason, when they sleep, it improves the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid, and they also found it flows the clearance of amyloid plaques. So the toxins that cause dementia and Alzheimer's. So get your sleep. And then the other important thing is to protect your head. Traumatic brain injury, repeated concussions has been shown to lead to dementia. So what we're finding now is a lot of NHL players and football players have severe brain damage, and there's basically a 100% chance that when they get older, if they live that long, they will develop dementia. So wear a helmet, seatbelt, avoid dangerous sports, and for life extension, avoiding dangerous sports is probably a good idea. And so that's nearing the end of my presentation. So the overall checklist: a Mediterranean diet, which includes physical exercise, with a focus on veggies, whole grains, and olive oil. So what you want to avoid is saturated fats, cholesterol, animal products, and toxins. Don't smoke, or if you're smoking, stop smoking. Daily physical activity. And the American Heart Association recommends that you do moderate exercise for 30 minutes a day. Now, moderate exercise is brisk walking, light jogging, but if you convert that into metabolic equivalents, that's around 48 metabolic equivalents, and if you convert that into heart rate, as long as your heart rate shoots above 110 or 120, that's moderate exercise. So you want to maintain a heart rate above 120 for 30 minutes every day. Preferably you do it all at once, but you can split it up into multiple sessions. Challenge yourself intellectually. Manage your stress. Have time to relax. Maintain a social network, because this helps you maintain engagement in the world as you get older. Sleep and reduce your risk of head injury. And my last slide. In terms of life extension, a lot of people don't like the idea because they have this notion that you don't want to live to 120, because they think of all the old people that they know, and they're all in the hospitals, they're all debilitated, they're all demented. But our focus isn't on living like that. So for a more enabling view, being old doesn't equate to being sick. So from what I've read, from what I've seen among extremely old as a medical student, the older you are, the healthier you were when you were younger. So looking at the numbers, centenarians, people who are like 100 years old, 110 years old, they don't start getting old until 92 to 95. They're able to maintain their function all the way till 92, 95. They're not demented. They're still functional. They're still independent. They still have a social life. They're still integrated in the world. So the healthier you are now, and the earlier you start, the longer you will live, and the more healthy you'll live when you're older. That's it.
Now, if anybody has any questions for Hans.
Do you take any sort of supplemental lithium, and how do you suggest people who want to would go about doing that?
Yeah, so there's many forms of lithium that you can buy. I haven't seen them in drugstores, so you have to buy them online. There's lithium orotate and lithium aspartate. But the smallest dose they come in is 5 milligrams. So what I do is basically try to break up that one pill into 7 days. So the guy recommends that the RDA is 1 milligram per day, but prefer to be safer and take a bit lower dose. And I've had some friends who did start taking lithium too, and a lot of them find that the mood gets better too. So in a Texas study where they looked at the water source among the different states and the lithium intake, not only was there a lower suicide risk, there was a lower homicide rate. So, yeah. If you read that paper, it really does seem that lithium is an essential nutrient that most people aren't getting.
I didn't quite get how much you were taking each day. You
A
bought a 5 milligram?
A 5 milligram pill, and you break it up into 7 days.
Okay, so the pill is big enough to cut down?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Just curious, like what natural water levels of it are. I mean, it looked like there was a range in that study.
No, I don't have those numbers, but in that paper, he basically took the amount of water a normal person would drink, which is like 1.5 to 2 liters, and determined what the RDA should be for humans. And interesting enough, if you go back like 50 years in the Evian water, spring water bottle, it actually had a pretty high source of lithium. It's found naturally. Yeah.
It's also about lithium. Actually, I've got two. One is the RDA for supplementation.
Yeah.
Do you suppose that that would need to be reduced for people that are already on medication for, like, given that it is a drug that is prescribed for bipolar disorder, is there like a possibility of interaction with other medications that people could be on, or alternatively, would they, they could just supplement with more if they have bipolar as a family or something?
I mean, like with bipolar, there's lots of medications they can take. The best one is lithium, and in terms of interaction with lithium carbonate and lithium orotate, I don't think it's a big deal because they're taking like 300 milligrams. You add another milligram, it doesn't make a difference.
Right.
And in terms of other mood stabilizing drugs, there are a lot of bipolar patients that take both lithium and other mood stabilizing drugs, so I think they make a difference either.
And then my other question was, Urban Fare is actually offering a water bottle. That's the only place I've ever seen it.
Yeah.
It's like $4 a water bottle or something like that. But they've got like their logo is the lithium symbol, and I looked at it, and it seems to have additional lithium in it. But I guess they don't have clearance from Health Canada or wherever they're distributing it from to talk about the sort of preliminary studies that seem to show this effect. So they just kind of talk around it.
Oh.
And then they start talking about neuroplasticity and things. But yeah, so if you want to get lithium water, they've got it for $4 at Urban Fare.
It's cheaper to get anything.
I think so.
You mentioned there's two types of lithium. Which is the best to supplement with?
Lithium orotate has a longer history, so I supplement with, but in reality, they're both just minerals and ions. It doesn't matter.
Could you clarify something for me, what you said about the creatine? And you said that the vegetarians taking a supplement of it fared well.
Yeah.
But did they fare better than the people who were getting it from meat sources?
Just as well.
Just the same?
Yeah.
And how much were they supplementing with each day?
That I can't tell you. but like I'm mostly a vegetarian, and I supplement with approximately 500 milligrams a day, because when I looked at studies on omnivores and how much meat they ate, they typically get around 400 to 500 milligrams of creatine in the animal products they eat. But what you have to take into consideration is that they cook the meat, so the creatine breaks down, and the creatine's trapped in the matrix of the meat. So when you digest it, you don't absorb it all. So in reality, I'm probably taking too much, but 500 milligrams compared to what bodybuilders take,
Yes.
a much lower dose, I think is pretty safe.
Thank you.
So, like as a vegetarian, what you should do is try to match the intake of the beneficial components of people who are omnivores. Right?
Okay, thank you.
So 500 milligrams.
Another question is, there's a bunch of different types of creatine.
Yeah. So creatine monohydrate is the only one that likely works. And what you have to, if you do decide on taking creatine, the one you have to take is pure. Because every other form of creatine monohydrates, they've done HPLC analysis on it and they found some kind of contaminant in it. No one knows what it is, but pure is pure.
Can you get that from Whole Foods, places like that?
I don't know if you can buy creatine in Whole Foods. You bought, like any supplement store would sell it.
Okay.
But just make sure the label says pure.
You mentioned that 5 to 10 years before someone gets Alzheimer's, you can notice differences in their cerebrospinal fluid.
Yeah.
I was wondering if that's like a test you can like request. And it's
Yeah.
like a
There's a recent paper published basically saying that if you measure the cerebrospinal fluid, you can prognostically predict who develops Alzheimer's. So it's something in the works. It's not being used right now.
Oh yeah. So you talked a bit about cholesterol and the importance of these cholesterol levels for dementia. But like I'm aware that the interaction between dietary cholesterol and actual cholesterol levels isn't that solid.
Yeah.
So what diet is going to either lead to healthy cholesterol levels and
And when I sift through the data, it is pretty solid. What the confounding factor is that a lot of the studies they do are in America, in the Western world, and their dietary cholesterol intake is so high. If they lower it, or if they add another 300 milligrams to it, it hardly makes a difference. Because what they've done is they've studied dietary intake of cholesterol compared to your lipid cholesterol, and the curve goes like this, and it flattens off approximately 300 milligrams. So above 300 milligrams, if you add another 100 milligrams, the cholesterol doesn't change. But if you take it under 300 milligrams, so if you give a vegetarian who takes less than 100 milligrams of cholesterol, and give them an egg, which is like 200 milligrams of cholesterol, their cholesterol shoots through the roof. So as a meat eater, if you add an extra egg, it doesn't make a difference to your cholesterol levels. But if you add an egg to a vegetarian, it makes a huge difference. And the other factor is, even though your cholesterols don't change as a meat eater, what they found is if you give them an egg to eat over a week, their inflammatory factors go up, like CRP, IL-6, and their amyloid serum levels go up too in blood. So even though cholesterol levels doesn't change, it has an effect on your body.
Is that egg yolks or egg white? Or?
Egg yolks.
I assume you're talking about total cholesterol, but wonder if your HDL is really good. Does that affect what the studies show on?
Okay, so with HDL, it's known as a good cholesterol, and they've created medications to elevate HDL. And in these huge phase 1, phase 2 trials, what they found is it doesn't decrease your risk of heart disease. Now, if you think of that, if HDL is higher, if it's good cholesterol, why doesn't it decrease your risk of heart disease? I think the reason is because HDL, it may have a mechanism, but it's not protected enough to overcome what caused the low HDL in the first place, which is a bad diet. Right? A bad diet. So HDL is based on what your diet is like, how much exercise you do. So if you live a healthy life with exercise, low cholesterol, low saturated fat, then your HDL is high. If you're If you eat junk food all the time, don't exercise, your HDL is low. So that's another example of like the reverse causation. It's not the HDL that's causing this heart disease. It's your lifestyle that's causing this heart disease.
I have one more. Oh, did you have?
Yeah, well,
You go first.
so you say lower saturated fat, but can you point to any studies that relate saturated fat intake to risk of cognitive decline?
I've never actually looked at that. But saturated fat does cause higher cholesterol. Right. So I'll look into that.
Well, yeah. I'm curious because I'm trying to reconcile that with the studies on like ketogenesis and how ketosis state is actually beneficial for the brain and increasing neurotrophins and factors like that.
Yeah.
Brain protective.
I mean, like particularly human, like maximum human lifespan is around like 120. Right? And I don't know if like if you did ketogenic diet, you could extend your lifespan past 120. It may offer protection for the brain for like people with seizures or people who maybe had traumatic brain damage, but in terms of your lifespan and your brain span, all we have to go on is based on like what centenarians have done, like what the Seventh-day Adventists in California look like. And a lot of the ones that do reach over 100, 110, they're vegetarians. Low saturated fat, low cholesterol, daily exercise.
I think my question was actually related to Dano's. It goes back to, I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Rose at all?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, he did a talk at the Alcor conference last October, and I've always been, quite skeptical of the paleo hypothesis because it always seemed to me kind of flawed at the level of it assumes that our gut and our, the way our body gets nutrition from diet hasn't changed since the Neolithic era, but we do know that, lactose tolerance and gluten tolerance has evolved in some populations.
Right.
But from their fruit fly studies, he did make a reasonable argument for the idea that people that are descended from ethnic groups that developed agriculture earlier should consider switching over to a paleo diet around early middle age, and that would assist with keeping healthy body weight, prevent kind of listing off this all of these different nasty features of aging. And based on what you've read, is that reconcilable with the Mediterranean diet, the Seventh-day Adventists, which seem to take kind of the opposite approach?
It's a big topic.
I might be going beyond the brain here. So,
So one, with the paleo diet, there is no paleo diet. I mean, around the world, if you look at all the cultures that currently are hunter-gatherers still, their diets are totally different. There's no one paleo diet. So if you were to like classify paleo diet as something, it would be in the negative, like excluding things, so processed foods. You exclude processed foods, then you're eating a paleo diet. And then now it comes down like to specifics. Like how can we determine what is, it comes down to details, what's good, what's not good. In terms of if you don't eat processed foods, if you don't eat junk foods, what do you eat and what do you don't eat? And in the end, it comes down to like all the evidence that we have. In terms of if you're middle age and you start eating paleo, so if I were to classify diets, vegetarian diets, Mediterranean diet would be at the top with olive oil. Then the average Western diet would be at the bottom. Right? So
anything in between is okay.
So if you go to paleo diet, you take a step up, but you're not quite at the top. Right? So
It seems to me like the other thing that's important to a paleo diet, which is different from the Mediterranean diet, apart from the lack of the processed foods, right? The other thing that characterizes paleo diets is saying like avoid grains, avoid carbs, right? It's the carb level, whereas in the Mediterranean diet, there's a big emphasis on grains, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So in the paleo, like a lot of paleo diet is based on just what people think, like what they've reasoned. this makes sense, let's do this. Right? And there's no evidence for it. And so they're like, oh, lectins found in whole grains. Lectins bind to glycoproteins on your gut and then cause inflammation. There's no research to show that's true. Right? It's just what they think makes sense, and then they follow it. Or grains have gluten. Now, like Lauren Cordain, who was in the beginning of the paleo movement, he tried to prove that if you ate gluten or if you ate lectins, it would be found in your bloodstream. So he fed people like lectin and gluten, and then took their blood and did HPLC and mass spec on it. Couldn't find anything. So if you take the paleo diet, which is like just reason from the human mind, and you take the evidence, a lot of them doesn't sit well together. They actually clash. Things like eating meat, eating saturated fat, eating cholesterol. All the research shows is not good for you. Right? But in people's minds that do follow paleo, well, it just makes sense. We evolved this way. Right? But a lot of times evidence and sense don't go together.
If no one else has any more questions, I'd just like to thank Hans. Thank you so much for your talk. And yeah, we learned a lot. Thank you.